it is only by obtaining some sort of insight into the psychology of crowds that it can be understood how slight is the action upon them of laws and institutions, how powerless they are to hold any opinions other than those which are imposed upon them, and that it is not with rules based on theories of pure equity that they are to be led, but by seeking what produces an impression on them and what seduces them.
64,000 is the median number of words per book. Average person reads about 200 words per minute. Simple math will tell us that is one book in 320 minutes. To accomplish this in 7 days, numbers say you would have to read for 45 minutes a day. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit that notification button, like, comment, and share. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Book of the Week series. Every week as I read another amazing title, I share it with the world. My name is Igor S.F. Walker. Today we look at The Crowd, a study of the popular mind by Gustave Le Bon. So how about you slow down and relax? Reduce all that noise for just a bit. Make that choice and decide to listen. In this video, we look at one of the most influential works of social psychology in history. The Crowd was highly instrumental in creating this field of study by analyzing in detail mass behavior. Stick around till the end. I will share with you some tools I haven't used that will help you tremendously in this game of life. Discover a way to find out what actually motivates you, what innate human need is driving all of your decisions and your behavior. I will share some tools to improve your self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, and relationship management. The true historical upheavals are not those which astonish us by their grandeur and their violence. The only important changes whence the renewal of civilization results affect ideas, conceptions, and beliefs. The memorable events of the history are visible as facts of the invisible changes of the human thoughts. The reason why these events are so rare is that there's nothing so stable in a race as the inherited groundwork of its thoughts. The present epoch is one of those critical moments in which the thought of mankind is undergoing a process of transformation. Two fundamental factors are at the base of this transformation. First is the destruction of those religious, political, and social beliefs in which all the elements of our civilization are rooted. The second is the creation of the entirely new condition of existence and of thought as a result of modern scientific and industrial discoveries. While all our ancient beliefs are becoming and disappearing, and the old pillars of the society are giving away one by one, the power of the crowd is the only force that nothing menaces, and in which the prestige of is continuously on the increase. The age we are about to enter will be truly the era of crowds. The destinies of nations are elaborated at present in the hearts of the masses and no longer in the councils of princes. Little adapted to reasoning, crowds are quick to act. As a result of their present organization, their strength has become immense. The dogmas, whose birth we are witnessing, will soon have the force of the old dogmas, that is to say, the tyrannical and sovereign force of being above discussion. The divine right of the masses is about to replace the divine right of kings. Civilization as yet have only been created and directed by a small intellectual aristocracy, never by crowds. Crowds are only powerful for destruction. The rule is always tantamount to a barbarian phase. A civilization involves fixed rules, discipline, a passing from the instinctive to the rational state, forethought for the future, an elevated degree of culture, all of them conditions that the crowds, left to themselves, have invariably shown themselves incapable of realizing. When the structure of the civilization is rotten, it is always the masses that bring about its downfall. Without a doubt, criminal crowds exist. But virtuous and heroic crowds, crowds of many other kinds, are also to be met with. The crimes of crowds only constitute a particular phase of their psychology. The mental constitution of crowds is not to be learnt merely by studying of their crimes, any more than that of an individual by mere description of all his vices. The crowd is always dominated by consideration of which it is unconscious. The disappearance of brain activity and the predominance of medullary activity, the lowering of the intelligence, and a complete transformation of the sentiments. The transformed sentiments may be better or worse than those of the individuals of which the crowd is composed. The crowd is as easily heroic as it is criminal. In its ordinary sense, the word crowd means a gathering of individuals of whatever nationality, profession, or sex, and whatever it might be, the chances that they have brought them together. Now, from the psychological point of view, the expression crowd assumes quite a different signification. The most psychic peculiar presented by the crowd is the following. Whatever be the individuals that compose it, however like or unlike their be mode of life, their occupation, their character, their intelligence, the fact that they have been transformed into a crowd puts them in possession of a sort of collective mind, which makes them feel, think, and act in a manner quite different from that in which each individual of them would actually feel, think, and act, were he or she in a state of isolation. Now, it is easy to prove how much the individual forming part of a crowd differs from the isolated individual, but it is less easy to discover the causes of this difference. In the collective mind, the intellectual aptitudes of the individuals, and in consequence their individuality, are actually weakened. The heterogeneous is swamped by the homogeneous, and the unconscious qualities obtain the upper hand. Different causes determine the appearance of these characteristics peculiar to crowds and not possessed by isolated individuals. The first is that the individual forming part of a crowd acquires, solely from numerical consideration, a sentiment of invincible power, which allows him to yield to instincts, which, had he been alone, he definitely would not have. He would have kept it under restraint. The second cause, which is contagion, also intervenes to determine the manifestation in crowds of their spatial characteristics, and at the same time, the trend that they are to take. In a crowd, every sentiment and every act is contagious, and contagious to such a degree that an individual readily sacrifices his personal interests to the collective interests. Finally, the third cause, and by far the most important, determines in the individuals of a crowd special characteristics, which are quite contrary at times to those presented by the isolated individual. I allude to that suggestibility, which, moreover, the contagion, sure enough, is neither more or less than an effect. We see then that the disappearance of the conscious personality, the predominance of the unconscious personality, the turning by means of suggestion and contagion of feelings and ideas in an identical direction, the tendency to immediately transform the suggested ideas into acts, these we see are the principal characteristics of the individual forming part of a crowd. He is no longer himself, but has become an automaton and has ceased to be guided by his will. Isolated, he may be a cultivated individual, but in a crowd, he is a barbarian. That is, a creature acting by instincts. The crowd is at the mercy of all exterior exciting causes and reflects their incessant variations. These impulses, which the crowd obeys, are so imperious as to annihilate the feeling of personal interest. Premeditation is absent from crowds. Racial influence, the obedience of crowds to suggestions, the images evoked in the minds of crowds are accepted by them as realities. Now, these images are actually identical for all the individuals composing a crowd. That is, the equality of the educated and the ignorant are no longer existent in the crowd. Crowds do not admit doubt or uncertainty and always go to extremes. Their sentiments always excessive. Crowds instinctively hostile to changes and to progress. Now, the morality of crowds, according to the suggestions under which they act, may be much lower or much higher that of the individuals composing them. However indifferent it may be supposed, a crowd, as a rule, is in a state of expectant attention, which renders suggestion easy. The first suggestion formulated, which arises, implants itself immediately by a process of contagion in the brains of all the assembled. In the identical bent of the sentiments of the crowd is immediately an accomplished fact. Our interest is to know what our great men were, as they are presented by popular legend. It is legendary heroes, and not for a moment real heroes, who have impressed the minds of crowds. Unfortunately, legends, even although they have definitely been put on record by books, have in themselves no stability. The imagination of the crowd continually transforms them as a result of the lapse of time, and especially in consequence of racial causes. In crowds, the foolish, ignorant, and envious persons are actually freed from the sense of their insignificance and their powerlessness, and are possessed instead by the notion of brutal and temporary but immense strength. Fortunately, this tendency of crowds towards exaggeration is often brought to bear upon bad sentiments. Crowds are only cognizant of simple and extreme sentiments. The opinions, the ideas, the beliefs suggested to them are accepted or rejected as a whole and considered as absolute truths or as not less absolute errors. This is always the case with beliefs induced by a process of suggestion instead of engendered by reasoning. A long time is necessary for ideas to establish themselves in the minds of the crowds, but just as long as time is needed for them to be eradicated. For this reason, crowds, as far as ideas are concerned, are always several generations behind learned men and philosophers. Crowds, being only capable of thinking in images, are only to be impressed by images. It is only images that terrify or attract them and become motives of action. For this reason, theatrical representations in which the image is shown in its most clearly visible shape always have an enormous influence on crowds. Nothing has a greater effect on the imagination of crowds in every category than theatrical representations. The power of conquerors and the strength of state is based on the popular imagination. It is more particularly by working upon this imagination that crowds are actually led. All great historical facts, the rise of Buddhism, of Christianity, of Islam, the Reformation, the French Revolution, and in our time the invasion of socialism, are direct or indirect consequences of strong impressions induced on the imagination of the crowd. Moreover, all the great statement of every age and every country, including the most absolute despots, have regarded the popular imagination as the basis of their power, and they have never attempted to cover in opposition to it. It was by becoming a Catholic, said Napoleon to the Council of State, that I terminated the Vendine War. It was by becoming a Muslim that I obtained a footing in Egypt. By becoming an ultramontane that I won over the Italian priests. And had I to govern a nation of Jews, I would rebuild Solomon's temple. Never, perhaps since Alexander and Caesar, has any great man better understood how the imagination of the crowd should be impressed. The convictions of crowds assume those characteristics of blind submission, fierce intolerance, and a need of violent propaganda, which are inherent in the religious sentiment. And it is for this reason that it may be said that all their beliefs have a religious form. The hero acclaimed by a crowd is a veritable god for the crowd. Traditions represent the ideas, the needs, and the sentiments of the past. They are the synthesis of the race and a weigh upon us with immense force. A people is an organism created by the past, and like every other organism, it can only be modified by slow hereditary accumulations. It is tradition that guides men, and more especially so when they are in a crowd. The changes they can effect in their traditions with any ease barely dare upon names and outward forms. Civilization is impossible without traditions, and progress is impossible without the destruction of those traditions. Now the difficulty, and it is an immense difficulty, is to find a proper equilibrium between stability and variability. The idea that institutions can remedy the defects of society, that national progress is a consequence of the improvement of institutions and governments, and that social changes can be effected by decrees. This idea, I say, is still generally accepted. The most continuous experience has been unsuccessful in shaking this grave delusion. Philosophers and historians have tried in vain to prove its absurdity, and yet they have had no difficulty in demonstrating that the institutions are the outcome of ideas, sentiments, and customs, and that ideas, sentiments, and customs are not to be recast by recasting legislative ideas. Institutions and governments are the product of a race. They're not a creator of an epoch, but are actually created by it. Peoples are not governed in accordance with their caprices of the moment, but as their character determines that they shall be governed. It is in no way the power of all people to really change its institutions. Undoubtedly at the cost of violent revolutions. They can change their name, but in their essence they remain unmodified. The names are merely futile labels which a historian that goes to the bottom of things scarcely concerns himself with. Democratic ideas are in profound disagreement with the result of psychology and experience. Many eminent philosophers, one of them Herbert Spencer, have had no difficulty in showing that instruction neither renders a man more moral nor happier, that it actually changes neither his instincts nor his hereditary passions, and that at times, for this to happen, it need only be badly directed. It is much more pernicious than useful. The statisticians have brought confirmation that these views by telling us that the criminality increases with the generalization of instruction, or at any rate, at a certain kind of instruction, and that the worst enemies of society, the anarchists, are actually recruited amongst the prize winners of schools. It is not assured, and nobody has ever maintained this proposition, that well-directed instruction may not be very useful and give practical results, if nothing else, in a sense of, if not in the sense of raising a morality, at least then in the sense of developing professional capacity. The primary danger of this system of education, very properly qualified as Latin, consists in the fact that it is based on the fundamental psychological error that the intelligence is developed by learning by heart of textbooks. Education consists in reciting by heart and in obeying. The magical power of words and formulae. The power of words bound up by the images they evoke and independent of their real sense. These images vary from age to age and from place to place, from race to race. The wear and tear of words, the political utility of baptizing old things with new names, and the words, when the words which they were designated produced an unfavorable impression on the masses. Variation of on the senses of these words are a consequence of race differences, a different meaning of the word democracy. Experience alone can fix in the mind of crowds truths, become necessary, and destroy illusions that have grown dangerous. Experience is only effective on the condition that it be frequently repeated. From the dawn of civilization onwards, crowds have always undergone the influence of the illusions. It is the creator creators of the illusions, that they have raised temples, statues, and altars more to them than to any other class of men. Whether it be religious illusions of the past or the philosophic and social illusions of the present, these formidable sovereign powers are always found at the head of all the civilizations that have successfully flourished on our planet. Occasionally, at the cost of terrible disturbance, man overthrows them, but he seems condemned to always set them up again. Without them, he would never have emerged from his primitive barbarian state, and without them again, he would soon return to it. They are just futile shadows. The social illusions weighing today upon all the heaped up ruins of the past, and to it belongs the future. The masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to defy error, if error seduces them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. Should it be regarded that crowds are never guided by reason? Well, we would not venture to affirm it. Without a doubt, human reason would not have availed to spur humanity along the path of civilization with the harder and the hardihood its illusions have done. It is the illusions, the offspring of those unconscious forces that we are led by, are doubtless necessary. Every race carries in its mental constitutions the laws of its destiny, and it is perhaps these laws that it obeys with a resistless impulse, even in the case of those impulses which are apparently the most unreasoned. The instinctive need of all beings forming a crowd is to obey a leader. They alone can endow crowds with faith and organize them. Affirmation, repetition, and contagion. The way in which contagion may spread from the lower to the upper classes in the society, a popular opinion soon becomes a general opinion. As soon as a certain number of living beings are gathered together, whether they be animals or men, they place themselves instinctively under the authority of a chief. The arousing of faith, whether religious, political, or social, faith in a work, in a person, or in an idea, has always been the function of the great leaders of crowds. And it is on this account that their influence is always very great. Of all the forces at the disposal of humanity, faith has always been one of the most tremendous, and the gospel rightly attributes to it the power of moving mountains. To endow a man with faith is to multiply his strength tenfold. The great events of history have been brought about by obscure believers who have had little beyond their own faith in their favor. The influence of repetition on crowds is comprehensible when the power is seen with which it exercises on the most enlightened minds. This power is due to the fact that a repeated statement is embedded in the long run in the most profound regions of our unconscious selves, in which the motives of our actions are actually forged. In the end of a certain time, we have forgotten who is the author of the repeated assertion, and then we actually finish by believing it. The beginning of a revolution is in reality the end of a belief. The precise moment in which a great belief is doomed is easily recognizable. It is the moment when its value begins to be called in question. Every general belief, being little else than a fiction, can only survive on the condition that it be not subjected to examination. The individual is bound to seek outside himself the forces he no longer finds within him. The function of governments necessarily increase in proportion as the indifference and helplessness of these citizens grow. They it is who must necessarily exhibit initiative, enterprising, and guiding spirit, in which private persons are now lacking. It falls on them to undertake everything, direct everything, and take everything under their protection. The state becomes an all-powerful God. This progressive restriction of all liberties in the case of sovereign peoples, in spite of an outward license that gives them the illusion that these liberties are still in their possession, seems at least as much a consequence of their old age as of any particular system. It constitutes one of the precatory symptoms of that decadent phase, which up to now, no civilization has actually escaped. After having exerted its creative action, time begins that work of destruction from which neither gods nor men escape. Having reached a certain level of strength and complexity, a civilization ceases to grow. And having ceased to grow, it is then condemned to a speedy decline. An hour of its old age has finally struck. With the progressive perishing of its ideal, the race loses more and more the qualities that lent it its cohesion, its unity, and its strength. The personality and intelligence of the individual may increase, but at the same time, this collective egoism of the race is replaced by an excessive development of the egoism of the individual, accompanied by a weakening of character and a lessening of the capacity for action. Within the definite loss of its old ideal, the genius of the race entirely disappears. It is a mere swarm of isolated individuals, and it returns to its original state, that of a crowd. Its civilization is now without stability and at the mercy of every chance. The populace is sovereign, and the time of barbarianism mounts. Civilization may still seem brilliant because it possesses an outer form, front, the work that came along from the past, but it is in reality an edifice crumbling to ruin, which nothing supports, and it is destined to fall, if all at the first storm. To pass in pursuit of an ideal from the barbarous to civilized state, and then when this ideal has lost its virtue, to decline and die, such as the cycle of the life of people. And there you have it, the crowd. Now please, do help out. It is easy. Simply like this video so more people can enjoy it. Share it too and spread the word. Do leave a comment and share your thoughts. Start a conversation. Subscribe to my channel and stay up to date. And the link to this book is in the description below. So you buy it and you read and you never stop learning, especially learning about yourself and nature. So gift yourself by taking the free human needs test on my website. Find out what actually motivates you. What innate human need is driving all of your decisions and your behavior. And if you feel you are ready to improve your self-awareness, your social awareness, your self-management, and relationship management even further, do check out my Master of Life Awareness program. The links are in the description below. Thank you. Love and respect.